I am here with Dr. Faraz Harsini. He is a vegan of over a decade. He's got a PhD in cell physiology and molecular biophysics. He's an expert in cultivated meat, and he's the founder and CEO of a very exciting nonprofit called Allied Scholars for Animal Protection. And at one point, he was even Alex O'Connor's biggest Patreon supporter, and I am very excited to talk to him. So, Dr. Faraz, thank you for speaking with me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I have to say, I came across your channel because one of my good friends here in Austin, his name is Ben. I don't know if he's watching, but he kept telling me, you need to check this guy out, debug your brain. And he kept telling me about it until I watched your videos.
Well, I'm glad he hassled you about it.
You're amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so I think, the main thing I want to talk to you about today is your nonprofit, ASAP. I want to get to know how it all started, the specifics of what you do there, and then I want to leave the audience with some actionable steps that they can take today to either help out or get involved. And so everyone in the chat just understand that the link is pinned in the chat, and if you scroll down into the description, you will find a link to Allied Scholars for Animal Protection right to the Get Involved page. And so there's like several suggestions there on that page. So at any time throughout this interview, just go ahead and click there. At least save the page to your favorites, visit it later, check it out and help out there. So, but before we get into that, I guess I just kind of want to know about, your vegan journey, as they say. How did you go from non-vegan to vegan?
I think like a lot of other people, I always called myself an animal lover to a point that I was against hunting. I was against types of needlessly harming animals. I'm from Iran, so in Persian New Year, people always buy goldfish, and lots of fish die throughout the process. So I was trying to actually change the culture, invite everyone that this is harmful, it's not unnecessary, let's not do that. Even before knowing anything about animal testing, that how harmful it is to humans and animals, non-human animals, I was still on the fence about it. So I was always concerned about issues related to animals, but I guess, I was just like a lot of other people, I was suffering from cognitive dissonance. And it was until when I was 22, I asked one of my friends to help me with the graphic design to encourage Iranians not to buy goldfish. And she told me, you don't make any sense. You literally eat fish. And now you're here, you're trying to save goldfish. So she said, you say you love animals, but you eat them. And that's kind of how it happened, how it started. The problem is, though, she was vegetarian. So she wasn't really pushing at all. She didn't give me any resources. I'm very grateful for her to even saying that. So don't take me wrong, but I think if someone came to me back in the day and showed me the videos, talked to me about it, I would have gone vegan very quickly. But it just had to happen organically. I didn't even look up anything for months. And I loved meat so much. And I can't even describe how much I love steak and bacon. And so I never saw it even in myself to not eat animal products. Until one day I said, I just stopped buying animal products. A few weeks later, I went out with friends and they had food. Someone held a chicken in front of my face and said, do you want some? And I said, no, thanks, I'm vegetarian. So that was the first time I actually said I was vegetarian. Which was June 3rd, I actually switched my birthday to that day. My actual birthday is actually today.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you. I didn't do anything today. I just got dragged out of my... But,
this is your birthday party.
Yeah. But, I truly think that we should celebrate accomplishments and things that we do in our lives that are meaningful. And to me, just the fact that I was born, something that was out of my control. I think that's why I changed it to June 3rd, because I think I made the best and biggest decision in my life. Something that really changed the course of my life after that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's kind of interesting to me because it almost sounds like I always say like no one is going to be an activist before they're a vegan, but in a sense it seemed like you were actually doing a little bit of activism before you went vegetarian or vegan, right? Because you were out there, making the poster for the fish. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have that thing, like they either like volunteer in dog shelters, they do some kind of something that we consider as activism. A lot of people would rescue dogs, right? Rescue animals. They would go to a shelter. They spend a lot of money to make sure their pet is okay. It's spend a lot of money and resources on just like making sure this one animal is happy and safe. It's just that we are all suffering from that cognitive dissonance, and at some point, we need someone to bring it to our attention. And I think if done correctly, most people should be able to make that connection.
For sure. So then I guess that was like your first like little mini piece of activism. How long was it, and kind of what was it that took you from merely being vegan to actually doing proper vegan activism?
It didn't take me that long. I think it took me 3 months. For 3 months, I felt great after going vegan. Felt some kind of connection with other animals. Like I'm not harming them anymore, at least not intentionally. It was really, really good. I remember going to bed just feeling great. But after that, I started just talking about what I learned, and I noticed how resistant everyone else was. And the part that really frustrated me the most actually was I spent a lot of time in my life being around people who were even more educated than me, or like at least as educated. Everyone was PhD, MD, postdocs, all of that. And seeing how even smart people couldn't just understand basic logic because we are all biased.
Yep.
We all grew up like eating animal products and we like it, so we try to justify it with like scientifically sound things. That really frustrated me. And someone told me, hey, your university used to have an animal rights group. Why don't you restart it? And that's exactly what I did. So I did that. Then I joined PETA. I was PETA campus rep for a couple of years. Did really activism with any major animal rights organization you can think of, the Humane League, Mercy for Animals, Animal Equality, all of them. And I guess what I also learned was that I had to learn a lot of things by myself. There wasn't any unified method for me to learn how to become an activist, how to use my careers. And, worse than anything was when I actually graduated, the student organizations that I had just died. And that was really sad for me. It was like my baby. I worked on it for 6 years, and it was just really sad to see everything that I did during all these years just died, which is something that extremely frustrates me, which led to starting ASAP, actually.
Okay. That's what I was wondering, because when you were saying, you were part of these other groups, it's like, well, it's one thing to be part of other groups. It's another to start your own entire thing. So this kind of started, the impetus for that was that you saw sort of like shortcomings in the other models that existed on campus. Awesome.
Yes, absolutely. In particular, there are some campus programs or university programs, like PETA had one, PETA Campus Rep. Now it's called SOS, Students Opposing Speciesism. And I honestly actually work with them and I love them. But the thing is, their focus is generally individuals. So they focused on training one individual person, such as myself. And then we graduate and everything dies down. So it's not meant to work on the system. So to bring animal advocacy in a systematic way in every university, which is something I want to do. So there are a couple of organizations that work with student organizations, but their goal is to either get signatures for their own campaigns, or they focus on individuals, right? So none of them is building the momentum, building the community in every university, which is something I want to do.
Okay. So yeah, right. It sounds like, you wanted to solve some of these problems, and the thing that you think your organization does differently is that you actually sort of marry the individual and the systemic, and not only marry them, but are trying to create a sustainable version of that rather than something that's going to sort of burn out after a couple years.
Absolutely. There are a couple of key differences here. One is sustainable. So I really think that everything else that other organizations do is not sustainable. And the proof of that is that most universities either don't have animal rights organization, or if they did at some point, or if they have at the moment, generally what the organizations do, most of them, they just do potlucks and social gatherings. And because of that, they're not getting new members. And so every now and then you have a motivated student like myself, and they do something, then they graduate, and everything dies down. And every time this happens, we waste time, we waste money, we waste training and expertise and experience. It doesn't get passed on. Mm-hmm. And when you try to change university systems, I look at universities as tiny versions of society. If you can't mm-hmm. change a university, then you can change the society. The problem is, to change universities, you need many years of consistent push and advocacy. For instance, to bring animal law to law schools, to bring plant-based nutrition education to medical schools, to have like consistent animal advocacy. Mm-hmm. These take a couple of years. It doesn't work when you do it for 2 years, students graduate, it dies down. Mm-hmm. So that sustainability is a key, which is completely lacking. And seriously, I challenge you, go look up top 100 universities in the US. At the very best, you have maybe 10 or 15 with any vegan club at all. And from mm-hmm. them, maybe 2 or 3 are doing actual outreach, educational material, yep. Educational events instead of just socializing. Socializing is good. I'm not saying it's not good, but it's not enough to beat the system.
Yeah, it's funny because I have actually looked at the major 3 universities around me, and that's exactly what I found, is that there's like no real major societies that are actually doing anything like really material on a regular basis. I think you brought up something good there too, is it's not just the sustainability thing, but like whenever you build something and then it like falls apart and you build it, it falls apart, like that initial building phase takes way more resources than keeping something going that already has momentum. And so you're just like wasting a lot of these like time, effort, emotional resources that you put into it, and you're just wasting them over and over again. And so I think that's like this other efficiency you get from building momentum and then maintaining that momentum,
Yeah, absolutely. Like you mentioned, that's a huge problem. And we try to answer that by, first of all, organizing the entire movement in every university. And second, by providing support from ASAP so that students don't have to do the hard work. For mm-hmm. instance, if we are scheduling an event, we do the graphic design, we do the planning, everything. Students just have to perform it. Because if you really think about it, students get busy, they have finals, and mm-hmm. there is spring break, and there is this holiday, that holiday, midterms. So there's always something. So we really want to make it super simple mm-hmm. as possible for students so they can focus on maintaining it. And registering a student organization in universities is very difficult. It's not an easy process. Mm-hmm. Universities often throw a fit. And what happens is that every time that we have to do it again, that's the time that we could have been spending on doing outreach and changing students and hearts and minds, but we are wasting that money, that time, and just like redoing something, right? Yeah. So the goal is to really be sustainable. And I tell you this, so just to imagine how bad and broken the system is when it comes to animal advocacy. Just imagine a music band where, all the players, musicians have been playing music for a couple of months. They don't have, their instruments are shitty. They don't have the right training. They haven't practiced together. They're out of tune. And is that a kind of music that you want to listen to? As opposed to that, just think about a symphony orchestra, where every musician is well practiced. They have practiced together. Everyone is doing the same exact thing. They're in tune. And then there is a conductor that makes sure everyone is in tune. Everyone is doing the same thing. So animal advocacy in college campuses right now is like the former example. Mm-hmm. different student organizations have different strategies. Some focus on welfareism, some do abolitionist things, some just do socializing. So that's why it doesn't work. We have different strategies. We have different branding. Like think about any effective student organization that you can think of, whether it's a frat, whether it's a, I don't know, for animal rights activists, maybe they're familiar with ALDF, Animal Legal Defense Fund, which is like a student organization associated with law schools, or the Federalist Society. Again, if you're not familiar with that, that's a very active student organization. All they do is to focus on student outreach. They're a conservative group, so whether you like them or not, they are effective. And the proof of that is today, 6 out of 9 Supreme judges are affiliated with Federalist Society. They don't do anything beyond student outreach for 40 years. So they did that in 40 years. They went from student outreach to having judges.
Oh, interesting.
In the most powerful place in this country, coming from Federalist Society. Or another example of that is if you're a student, you can probably relate to this. If you go to your campus, odds of not running into a Christian organization or Christians is very low. They're always there. I'm not religious, but I admire their passion. So something we did, we studied how come they're so successful. And we really want that. We want veganism and animal rights be just like that. So if you're walking down your campus, if you're not coming across vegan message, that's how I know I failed. And that's exactly what I'm trying to solve.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah, you said a couple of things I like there. I think, one thing is like about removing as much friction as you possibly can for people. I think that's something we want to keep in mind as vegans always, because we're not just asking people to change a belief, we're asking them to change a behavior. And, little nudges here and there can really go a long way in changing behavior. For instance, like right now at the top of chat, there's a little pinned link. So everyone who hasn't seen that pinned link that goes right to Allied Scholars for Animal Protection, click that and it'll take you right to somewhere where you can get involved by donating or potentially, I think, submitting like a volunteer application. So sorry, I just wanted to plug that again, but just going to keep reminding you guys that's at the top there and it's also in the description. And then also got you guys, Faraz, if you're down at the end of this to answer questions and stuff, I can just have people, give super chats and donations, and then we can take their questions at the end if that's something you're interested in.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Another thing you said that I think is interesting, based on some research in a book that I just was reading called Change, is how targeting a university, right? So this book I'm reading is like this. The old sort of model was you get information to like a celebrity or something and they like disperse it to everyone. And that's how social norms change. But it seems like most of the research is actually not pointing at that. Instead, it seems like what you do is you go to like clusters on the edge of social networks and build small bits of, basically small bits of agreement and adoption in these little like localized networks. And then those sort of move towards the center. So whereas what we thought for years is that you just put something in the center and then it just blasts outward like a fireworks display. It actually turns out it seems like you just want to incubate tiny bits of support all around the periphery. And then those eventually come and sort of, come to the center basically, and then hit these big nodes like news outlets, celebrities and things like that. And it seems like that sort of comports with what you're talking about here with targeting universities and incubating support there, especially sustainable support. So yeah, I think that's just really cool.
I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the big questions always in animal advocacy is, should we focus on individuals or the system, right? And I think there is a way to do both. And the way to do that is by focusing on universities. And I'll tell you why. A lot of people who say that individual outreach is not as effective as it should be, the type of studies or what they really think of when they say that is like if you go, to a random place and start leafleting people, right? And, some may go vegan and then they go about their lives, right? But with universities, like I said, it's like a small society. So you can build the community. You can't generally do that in a city as easily or as like in the country, but you can do that in universities. Another very huge factor here is that when you make somebody vegan or when vegans become active or understand the urgency, they can go about graduate and actually use their careers to change the system. So right now we don't want to, we are looking for like, shortcuts. So we go directly to politicians who couldn't care less about animals or the environment, right? As opposed to having politicians who are already vegan. And we can see, like, we have examples of politicians who are plant-based or vegan, like Cory Booker, and we know how much they get done because they truly believe in this cause. So we need students to become the future Cory Bookers and people like him. So that's a model. So to change the individuals, but in a way that you can actually harvest this to change the system. And we really want to support the students from the beginning to the end. And it's just as important. We don't need just more vegans. We need more active vegans. Yes. And when I talk about activism, I don't mean that you should go to a streets necessarily and just like talk to people and do something that you and I might do. What I say is you could use your careers. That's a type of activism. If you're into finance, making money and supporting other activists, other nonprofits, if you are into science, maybe you can work on alternative proteins, plant-based, cultivated fermentation products, whatever it is. If you're a lawyer, become a politician, change the law. But I really think that all of that comes from universities, and we can do that. I know that the potential exists. I know the talent already exists. The thing that is lacking is the organization. We are just not united. We are not organized. And that's how we are just scattered and all over the place. Every time I give a talk, a couple of students come to me and say, hey, I either went vegan or I've been thinking about doing something with my life. I just didn't know. Now I'm like motivated to use it. And I have like actual examples. I can give you names of people who changed their careers and are doing like working on alternative proteins. Or full-time work as animal rights advocate just because they happen to come across ASAP, right? And what really frustrates me is that how many of these talents exist, except that we are not in every university. And I think it's just, when I go to bed knowing that was a missed opportunity, there might have been someone who could become the future Cory Booker, except that they never became vegan or they never found that fire. That's what hurts me, and that's what gets me out of bed.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think, this reminds me of something where, like, when people, like, I'll hear this from people, well, individuals don't make a difference. We have to rely on systemic change. And again, I do get this to a degree, but, like, the people I'm running into who are saying that, they're not, like, the dishwasher at a TGI Fridays who's saying that to me. It's, like, literally students at Duke University. And I'm like, you understand that you are going to be the system. Like, you are going to one of the top universities in the United States, right? Possibly in the world. You are going to be connected to the most powerful, connected, persuasive people there are. And you're going to be working with them in their corporations, in their businesses, whatever it is. Even if something isn't like specifically like vegan or vegan related, just being there and being in the room and, whenever there is a company potluck or like you guys have to order something for the whole meeting room or whatever. And you say, well, okay, I'm vegan, so we need to do a vegan option here. Even stuff like small stuff like that in influential spaces, like the top echelons of major organizations is going to make a difference. And so like especially when I hear this from people at top universities, I'm like, you are going to have way more impact than the average individual is going to have, just ambient level, And so I think that's another smart thing about targeting these universities, specifically the ones, there were like 4 I think you're specifically targeting right now. Wasn't it like Columbia, Brown, somewhere else? I can't remember them.
So yeah, we started at UT Austin and Texas Tech University. Next semester, we're expanding to Texas A&M.
Okay.
And I'm working with students at MIT, Harvard, Brown, and Columbia. Yeah. And again, another proof, Harvard actually doesn't have like an actual animal rights club or animal protection club. It's not that the students haven't tried actually Harvard. It's a long story, but it's just to say that even top schools, they don't really focus on animal advocacy. And something that I'm hoping to teach students is that no matter what you're studying, whether it's about environment, law, politics, PR, whatever it is, you can make it about animal rights and use it for this purpose. because I wholeheartedly believe that the top problems in the world are all connected with animal consumption, which is something I think is kind of missing too, because even when you get into like EA and 80,000 hours, which are supposed to show you that these are the most important, impactful careers, they talk about climate, they talk about antibiotic resistance, but they don't talk about animal rights. As I was like, bro, literally antibiotic resistance, animal agriculture, you know, how. So we make that point that whatever you do, you can make an impact. And also, I actually have seen like students, like one student in a medical school who actually incorporated plant-based nutrition education into as a part of curriculum in his medical school.
That's awesome.
He went from being anti-vegan to this point, by the way. So this is one student. Things that I've seen students do in the course of 2 or 3 years, if they put their efforts in it, and if they have that fire, it's beyond, it's unbelievable. So we know it's possible to even change the system in universities, but I 100% agree with you. We waste a lot of time trying to use shortcuts and, you know, go to politicians. How do you change the system? The system is made up individuals, right? The politician doesn't care about you and I. They care about their votes, right? So it's if we don't have the numbers, if we don't have the right people in the position of power, how are we going to change the system?
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I think we kind of talked about the theory a lot here. So I kind of want to get into like the details then. So, you know, if all goes according to plan, how you want it to, what is ASAP going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Like, what are your milestones, your goals, short-term, mid-term, long-term goals?
That's an excellent question. The short-term goal within 5 or 6 years is we want ASAP chapters in every university, at least top 100. And the reason, so every ASAP chapter is going to be a registered and functional student organization doing the exact same thing. I want to say that right now, animal rights organizations are called different things in different universities, you know, Veg Club, Animal Rights Club, and it's just not consistent. So we want allied scholars for animal protection chapter in every top 100 universities in the US. So that's step one. Step two is to actually do what we do, which is focusing on 3 things. One is outreach. So that's a part that you can't miss us. So if you're on campus, you should come across vegan message. And that's how we reach out to vegans and absorb them, or we make new vegans and bring them to the club. The second one is education and empowerment. So that's for both vegans and non-vegans. An example of that is when we bring plant-based physicians like Dr. Clapper or Milton Mills to medical schools to talk about food injustice, plant-based nutrition, etc. Or, as importantly, we train vegans to become active, to think about their careers, to find that fire, and basically, again, become active. And third is by making dining halls go plant-based.
I love that.
So that makes veganism more accessible in universities. And so that should make a positive feedback loop, right? So you're constantly doing outreach, getting new members, you're constantly training them, and you're constantly making veganism more accessible. So it should be a positive feedback loop that grows by itself and becomes sustainable. And the entire time we want to support it on the ground, not just like virtually, but just being there on the ground and helping them. So once this system is in place, hopefully this should happen within 5 or 6 years. Then the mid goal is to expand to even more universities and go international, especially India and China, because everybody, I guess, understands why. And third, the long-term impact is like in 20 to 30 years from now, we want people like with that fire, people who we trained in the position of power, to become the future scientists, the future lawyers, etc. So that's really the goal. And I think that's how we can change the system. But how can we expect that to happen if we don't have any infrastructure for this to happen, right?
Yeah.
So that's a goal. And I can't just say, to understand what it actually looks like, it's sometimes easier to see what the failure looks like. And to me, the failure is right now. So in 5 years from now, if you go to a university and you don't come across a group of passionate vegans doing outreach and talking about veganism, if you don't come across them, that's how I know I failed. I want everyone in the university to come across that vegan group, just like those Christians. Like everyone knows, oh, these Christians are always there, right? Yeah. Whether you are atheist or Christian or Muslim, you know about them.
Yeah.
And even if you have a friend, like you may not be vegan, but your vegan friend, just joins the university and you say, hey, did you know about ASAP? You're vegan, you may want to join them, right? I want everyone to know about it. Newspapers, articles, Reddit, all of that.
Yeah.
So that's a goal.
That's awesome. Yeah, man, I love that. I was going to ask you that at some point, like what does failure look like to you? So I think it's always a good thing that you want to know, you want to have some sort of diagnostic, some sort of, metric that says, okay, this means I need to change tactics, So like if that were the case, right? If in 5 years you didn't achieve that goal, that wasn't manifest at college campuses, what do you think you'd do? Is there like a plan B? Would you have to like readjust, diagnose it at the time, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say that what we do, we know that it works because it has worked before and we have tested it in a small scale. So everything that I mentioned, we already have done it and then we have seen the results. So it's not a hypothetical, like a theoretical scenario that, I just have this idea that I want to try and see how it goes. That's not the case here. I've been studying the movement really for 10 years. As I mentioned, like worked from welfareists to abolitionist groups, all of them. And something that I noticed was this huge gap that no one is, like, it's so obvious to me, but no one is really addressing, because there is no money here. The money goes elsewhere to like cage-free campaigns and etc. But I was like, huge gap here and no one is addressing it. That has to be me. And we have tested it in like UT Austin and Texas Tech. I do know people who changed their degrees after coming across ASAP or changed their the course of their careers and doing full-time advocacy just because they came across us. So if that's not a proof that it works, I don't know what is. But really, again, we know that it works in a small scale, but we really want to scale up. We want to expand the team and just be in every campus. But yeah, definitely we always listen to feedback that we are receiving. That's one of the best things that I get involuntarily, actually. So every time I have a talk, every time we have a meeting, I get a lot of emails from students. They either go vegan, they say that, I wish I could share, but it's like really, I listen to this, I'm going vegan. Or I've been thinking about doing something with my life. I thought about this and that, but I don't know what to do with my career. But, after this, I'm so motivated. And, we, like I said, I see the potential, I see the talent to be there. We just need to harvest it. We just need to be organized. And when I say a unified infrastructure, that's what I mean. So you go to every university, every ASAP chapter is doing the same thing, same strategy, same mission, and basically training students to become the future leaders.
Yeah, yeah. So standardize it and then scale up, basically. So
Absolutely.
because you worked in food research, right? So you're working in labs. I imagine in those labs there's all sorts of scale up procedures and standardization and stuff. And so I imagine some of that has flowed over, because I've worked in those labs too and done scale up and process optimization and all that. And so it's funny to me because it's like it does strike me as a very like scientific perspective to come at it from, like a very like, this is the efficient way to like, cause this adoption to be more widespread, So I really like that.
It's funny you say that because I used to work in a pharmaceutical company as a process development scientist.
Yes.
So I was both involved in R&D and process development. So how to design new drugs for pandemics and other infectious diseases. Now that we have a drug, how do we scale it up to be profitable and practical to just like produce in that huge quantity? And even right now, my job at Good Food Institute is basically working on scaling up alternative proteins. So we know we can do it, but the problem is how do we do that in large scale? So it's kind of funny that my scientific background is kind of the same thing.
No, it is. Yeah, I've worked in PD as well. I've done a couple of years in PD, and now the thing is it is interesting because it is a little counterintuitive because it's often easy to think, oh, what works on the micro scale will just scale up effortlessly to the macro scale, and it doesn't always. There are all sorts of little things that you have to change in order to get that scaling. Do you see that as? Do you think there's going to be any sort of parallels with scaling this at colleges, or scaling it to the entire country?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. That's a difference between a chemist and a chemical engineer. Chemist comes up with a new molecule and say, I'm done. A chemical engineer job just starts there. And funny enough, my bachelor was actually chemical engineering, process design. So, but yeah, scaling up at this point really, so the good thing about it is actually the more we scale, the easier it gets in terms of resources, because if we have a system in place, then we can share that with every single student or chapter. Give you an example, for instance, to work with dining halls, something that we are doing differently than every other organization that works with dining hall is that we support students and we bring support from vegans and non-vegans to show that there is demand for vegan options. So what we do is we buy a domain. For UT Austin is actually called UT Students Deserve Better. I believe it's .com. And so if you go there, it's a petition. We talk about environment, we talk about food injustice or food racism, animal cruelty, all of that. And the way this works, the beauty of it is we don't have to redesign this for every university. Right now, there is like maybe a handful of universities who are working with dining halls. And every time they have to design a petition, it's a complete different strategy, a different, graphic design. And it takes time, it takes money. Whereas here, we have that system in place. All we have to do when we talk to a new student organization, we say, hey, just replace these, make it your own, or give us feedback. We take care of it. Then you can just raise signatures. And that way we actually have support from students to change the system. A lot of other organizations approach dining halls directly without having student support. And that's helpful, but it's not enough. So we need to show, at the end of the day, students are paying for the school. So without their demand, nothing is going to change.
That's a good point. Yeah, so that kind of leads me into a couple questions I had then too, sort of about how do you go about recruiting students? Do you only recruit vegan students? When you do recruit non-vegan students, are they allowed to get out there and can they do outreach as well, even if they're not vegan? Like, how do you handle all that?
So there were a few things. How do we recruit and vegan versus non-vegans? The clubs are open to everyone who wants to take a step to make this world a better place for animals. So as long as that's your mission, nothing else really matters. You're welcome. You come to ASAP chapters as long as everyone is respectful. The goal is to make the university a better place for environment, animals, and other humans. So everyone is welcome to join the meetings, all of that. The officers naturally happen to be vegans because typically you just don't have non-vegans who are interested in veganism. So that just plays out by itself. When we recruit, we've tried different things. So at first, this is something I did actually at Texas Tech without knowing anybody there. I ran a social media post. I started posting on Facebook, just out of pocket, ran an ad that said, do you want to fight for animals? Join us or whatever. And a few people contacted me, and then I connected everyone. Then I made a trip to the place. I connected everybody there in person, and we started a chapter right there. So I started from zero, knowing nobody there, just to prove to myself that I can do this. But now we are in a point that we get more requests from students than we can actually afford having ASAP chapters. And that's just because our team is still small.
Wow.
And in scaling up, the biggest problem is honestly just having full-time staff who are paid and can just do this, be on the ground and help students. So we really believe this just doesn't work if you are virtual. So right now we actually travel, we go to every university, but at some point I can be in every university with my small team.
Yeah.
We need more people. And so that's really the only thing that we need to scale up, is just to have more money so we can like hire more people. But at this point, to answer your question, we actually get more requests from students. They either have like an animal advocacy club. They come to me and they say they want to change it because they see that they haven't been able to get new members, and they foresee that they're going to go out of business in a year. So they actually come to us, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And I get that all the time from like Twitter, from Instagram, messages from people. And I love that, and that's what really get me going.
Yeah.
But we don't have that problem, thankfully. So right now I get more requests than I can handle. So
well, that's amazing. That's great to hear. Yeah, I actually like, I wouldn't have expected that actually. So that's really, really cool. So yeah, I guess then like, you know, for my audience, right, you know, you need more money, you need more staff. There's all sorts of things, you know, ASAP could use. So kind of like what I was thinking, I like to give people things of threes, right? Are there like sort of like a few, maybe 2, 3 simple actionable steps that my audience could take today, or anyone watching this live stream later could take right now to help out ASAP?
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
The most obvious one for students is that they can either start an ASAP chapter if they're serious about activism, or just volunteer if we already have ASAP chapter in that university. So that's the most obvious one. The second is to actually have an impact on the entire organization rather than local impact. That would be helping us to hire people. So part of it is if you think the mission really aligns with what we do, with what you believe, and if you want to work with us, hit us up, or that if you can help us to hire those motivated people with donating to ASAP, that would be also amazing. Because I'm going to be honest, I'm just not a business person, and I'm not, I have that expertise in on ASAP board, but I'm not that guy. But all I know is that really to expand the work, we just need to hire more people. And we already have even like candidates. It's just like a majority of money in our in animal rights movement goes elsewhere, not to do something fundamental and effective, unfortunately. So that's why it makes it so important for small donors or monthly subscribers. Any amount really helps, even like $100,000 per month. I would be very grateful.
Awesome.
That was a joke. So there's that small action. And beyond that, graphic design or video editing or just donating skills, not just necessarily to me, but you can definitely check out Vegan Hacktivists. They are amazing. I've used their service all the time. So that's people like you who really want to help other organizations, but they don't have the money or they don't have the time. But what they're really good at is designing websites or I don't know, whatever. So that's a fantastic way to contribute to the movement without, you know, that's not like financial. So definitely consider that. And if you know any students, send them to us. So I always say, first thing, please go vegan. That's the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
And second, contact us if you want to work for us, volunteer for us. if you want to start a chapter, and just the donation.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. So they can donate, they can start their own chapter, they can potentially work for you. Yeah, that's awesome. So now, and if someone did want to work for you, right, they don't have to come to Texas, right? Are any of these positions remote?
So that's a great question. We do have remote positions, but we also need on-the-ground force. But that might actually work because it doesn't have to be in Texas. For instance, we are interested in Northeast because we are going to be covering Columbia, Harvard, Brown, MIT, and that region, possibly Madison, Wisconsin. So they don't necessarily have to be in Texas. But actually, one of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, we studied Christian organizations and see why they are so successful. Turns out one of the biggest differences is that with vegan animal rights groups, if there is any central organization like ALDF, they rely on one person to basically organize 100 chapters or so remotely. And that generally doesn't really happen effectively. It's impossible. So the reason we've been so effective and successful is because we have a small team, but everyone goes to campus. We are on campus for a week. We do all kinds of events like dog meat, human milk, debates. You just can't miss us for a week. So we know that everyone on that campus has walked and has seen us.
I see you, yeah.
Ideally, I want this more, but so far, because we are a team and we have to travel, we have to do 1 week at a time. But that already has worked. So it's so important for us to have people who are on the ground and not students necessarily, so that they can devote their entire time to organize these events in universities. So yes, we need remote positions, but most importantly, also we need people on the ground.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm always happy to hear that there's like very specific things that my audience can do. So, again, I'll just I'll say it one more time. I keep reiterating it to you guys. The link is there in chat. The link is there in the description. Definitely check it out and contact anyone you know also. So then maybe like a little bit of a harder question here. What do you think your biggest mistake has been so far? As far as the advocacy in general, or maybe specifically with ASAP, and sort of how would you avoid it in the future? Or what did you learn from it?
My biggest mistake was not going vegan sooner. So there's that. But regarding activism, I think misunderstanding that being direct and forward means that you're rude. I think that conception really put me behind in my activism. So I wasted many years in activism being worried about sounding like too serious or too rude, not knowing that this actually has been seeded by non-vegans because they don't want us to speak up. So no matter how you speak up, they're going to say you sound angry, you sound it's just easier to label vegans than do self-reflection. So I think I was a victim of this kind of thinking. And I give you a very quick example. So in the past, when I was talking about veganism, if someone said going vegan is hard, I would say, hey, there is Beyond Meat, there is Beyond Burger or whatever, there is vegan cheese, and they're going to say, oh, Daya sucks. And then I'm like, oh, okay, so there is like so many other brands, you just have to go. And then that actually led me to burn out, because here I am thinking about the ethics, here I am thinking about all the victims and animals, but what's coming out of my mouth is not animals, it's vegan cheese. And that frustrated me even more and made me probably actually sound like angrier without accomplishing anything, to be honest. But when I started working or volunteering for Anonymous for the Voiceless, that really changed my activism approach. So today, instead of rambling for 2 hours, all I say is, do you think it's harder for you to be vegan, or do you think it's harder for those animals to go through that? Troll free. No one has trolled that question. Everyone says no. Of course, immediately. Of course, it's harder for animals. All I have to ask them is, do you think if this was happening to you, if you were being abused, how urgently would you want that abuse to stop? And everyone says urgently. And that's really good, because after the conversation, a lot of people say, you gave me some good ideas. I'm going to go think about it, take baby steps, or perhaps reduce. So I really learned that we don't have to compromise for animals to be effective. For us, our job as activists is to give people the right solution. What they choose is always up to them, right? So yeah, advocating for campaigns or methods that I don't think are as effective, such as like focusing on like 1 extra inch of space for chickens, that does not solve pandemics, that does not solve environmental impacts, that does not save animals from dying, right? Versus all that money, all that effort could go to universities, make new vegans, make passionate vegans.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Today, I spend a lot of time making sure that our vegans can understand this urgency, and if they become active, that's one of the best things that we can do. So not compromising for animals and looking at it as a social justice issue is one of the best things that I've learned, and one of my biggest mistakes before. And about ASAP, when you said like, I guess one of my mistakes was, before we solidified our strategy, a lot of times we tried to work with a student group that all they wanted to do was like socializing, and sometimes it's just really hard to get vegans active, and sometimes it just doesn't work. All they want to do is to socialize, have potlucks, and they know everything that you and I know. They've even tried activism a few times, so I don't really know why they don't get active. But trying to waste a lot of my time and resources on students like that, instead of right now, when I have so many students that come to me, they initiate this, that just makes me feel so much better, and it makes everything so much more effective because they initiate it. So I think that's why, before ASAP, there was a moments that I actually just was trying to reach out to student organization and help them. Not necessarily have ASAP chapters, but just like, how can I help you? How can I help you? But I realized a lot of them just, even when I offer free help, they don't want it. But now when we have ASAP chapters with students who have that fire, they don't need me to motivate them. They already have it. All I have to do is to just support them. So I wish I knew this sooner, and I just focused on people with that fire.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's really awesome. I think it's all great stuff. I just point out just something that you went over there too, about being direct. So there's a great book. It's called Motivational Methods for Vegan Advocacy by Casey Taft. He's a clinical psychiatrist. And he talks about the difference between passive, aggressive, and assertive communication. And he says the problem for most vegans is that they're either too passive or too aggressive, and they're not just assertive. And so I would definitely recommend that book to anyone listening right now. He goes over what exactly that means. He goes over lots of examples in a vegan context of how to be assertive while not being passive or aggressive. And it's a really great book. It's a really good method for talking to people. And like you said, it causes you to not resent yourself. So like, I think they describe it as like assertive communication both respects you and the other person. If you're being aggressive, you might be respecting yourself, but you're not respecting that other person. And if you're being passive, you're respecting them, but you're not respecting yourself because you're not being true to who you are and saying what you need to say in the moment. So definitely recommend that book to everyone. Very short book. I think it's like 80 or 90 pages. So yeah.
That was beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
You said what I was trying to say in like 2 hours in like 2 sentences.
No. I think you actually said it better than me. I really enjoyed listening to all that. I think, yeah. Yours was also beautiful. Throw the compliment back at you. So I think that pretty much covers ASAP. I don't know how much time. You tell me how much more time you've got here, because we can cover a couple.
Open.
You're open? Okay. So I just want to say to everyone, in chat, like I said, so if you scroll down a little below the link to ASAP, you will see a donation thing. So any tips, donations like that, if you want to ask Dr. Faraz any questions, just go ahead and throw them there. And sort of towards the end, we can get to all those. Let's even just say, this isn't going to be a ton of money, I don't think, but any money I get from this live stream, we'll donate it to Allied Scholars, just to potentially try to get some more engagement here. So anything you donate today, guys, I will donate that to ASAP.
Thank you, Justin.
Yep, no problem. So let's, what are we going to get into? So I want to ask you either about cultivated meat or about Cosmic Skeptic. So let's start with cultivated meat. I don't know much about it. What is the timeline for cultivated meat? What do you think the acceptance is going to be like? What is on the horizon for cultivated meat, just in the general here?
I think we are making serious progress on that in terms of acceptance. I think people are way more open to it than a couple of years ago. We do something, we call it Uber test. So every time we take Uber, we ask the Uber driver, they say, where are you going? It's always, make up a story or just make it about veganism. That's what you do. So, I'm going to see my vegan friends because we love animals and we don't eat them. Anyways, so one of the things we do is by asking them, I'm going to this conference. It's about like cultivated meat or AKA lab grown. We just don't call it lab grown anymore because it really doesn't come from lab, and lab grown doesn't really sound appetizing.
It doesn't test well.
Cultivated meat. And just 4 or 5 years ago, people would say, oh my God, like that sounds like Frankenstein, like meat. I'm not gonna ever try it. But today, when I do activism, a lot of people say, actually, I'm not gonna go vegan, but if cultivated meat ever becomes available, I'm gonna switch. To which, by the way, I say you shouldn't wait for this to become available for you to do the right thing. So that's not a justification, just to be clear.
Yeah.
And so, I think the consumer acceptance rate is going up, especially after they're told how it's produced. So I don't think I'm worried about that. I think by the end of this year, it should be available in certain high-end restaurants for people to try. But when it becomes available in, I don't know, Walmart, it's really hard to say. But we are making serious progress. It's only a matter of the scientific challenges. So it's not like we don't know the science behind it. It's like how to scale up. And to me, if we landed on the moon with, I don't know, technology of back then, this is not something that we can't do. It's only a matter of time. So there's that. In terms of process, I mean, I know that a lot of people might feel differently about it, especially vegans. And I have to say that I acknowledge that it might not be the perfect solution, but it's one of the best ones that we have. The reason I say it's not a perfect solution because I sympathize with the idea of the original cells coming from animals. It could come from an egg or tip of a feather in theory. But there is that animal initially involved. So during the process, then it's like completely disconnected from the original animal. So every time you want your cultivated meat, you're not going back to animals, just to be very clear. But there is a connection with the first batch of animals. They don't necessarily have to be killed or harmed, but I sympathize with that idea. We all know why. And the other one is just to also normalizing that you're still eating meat. And at the end of the day, you lose that health, nutrition aspect because plant-based foods, whole food plant-based foods are by far the healthiest in comparison. So you lose some of that. But then there is like so many benefits when it comes to the environment, pandemics, and also animals that I think it overcomes that. So I just wanted to be clear because I know that how a lot of people feel about it in vegan community. So just wanted to clarify that. But yeah, I hope that I answered your questions. Consumer stance is going up. When it's going to be available in Walmart, I don't know, but I think in the next decade or two, it should be available. And yeah, what was the last one?
Oh, I mean, I think you answered more than I even asked, actually.
Right.
So, thanks.
I made up a bunch of questions on the way. So
yeah, you covered it all. I did want to ask one thing though that you mentioned there. Do we know how much lower, if at all, the environmental footprint is of cultivated meat? Because there still is going to have to be energy put in. I know it's going to use significantly less land, I assume, but
yeah, absolutely. The research actually has been done extensively. So it's not just like ideas that this is probably how it works, but there are techno-economic analyses that are available. One just actually got published in collaboration with TU Delft. And a lot of times it's actually a third party, so it's not like a vegan organization, a third party, a university partner. They do the study. And in fact, what they used, if I'm not mistaken, was actually the I guess, farm practices in Europe, not just like more like a, I guess, like better farms. So that was the comparison. That's what they use for data collection. And cultivated meat still wins in many aspects, especially when it comes to land and greenhouse gas emissions. In some cases, like water and energy consumption, it might come close depending on what the source of energy is, if they're using renewable energy, if the factory farming is using renewable energy. So, but almost in all sections, cultivated meat is better. Something that is not mentioned there is like, there is no chance of pandemics with cultivated meat. There is just none, because you just don't have. And
or like antibiotic resistance, right? Which is like another serious thing.
Antibiotic resistance and pandemics. I think these are things that we kind of underestimate how important they are. So antibiotic resistance is going to be basically the end of modern medicine, as World Health Organization calls it, because the moment we have a simple infection, with an antibiotic resistant species, that can kill us. So all the drugs that we have for bacteria would be basically useless. And zoonotic diseases, the influenza going on right now in the US. So all of that, right? So there is no question that it's gonna be beneficial, but always remember that plant-based food is even better. So if you normalize everything based on plant-based food wins every single time in every single category. There's nothing even close to that by far. Land, water, toxic chemicals, waste, everything. But like cultivated meat comes after that.
Yeah. I think I've been saying for a while that people aren't nearly scared enough about antibiotic resistance yet. I mean, people in the know are, but the general public is like very like woefully unaware of like what a powder keg antibiotic resistance would be, especially if certain simple infections became resistant to some of our like most powerful drugs. And I just want to ask you one thing, just a clarifying question here. You said, it's better on most environmental metrics. I assume that's at the scale it is right now, right? So presumably when we scale up, we're going to be getting massive efficiencies in the production of that cell-based meat, right?
I think they included that in their models.
Oh, that was part of it. Okay.
Basically, of course, not what we have today for cultivated meat, which is very small. So that wouldn't be a fair comparison. But I think they compensated for that kind of thing.
Like what they project it would be by the time it was scaled up.
Correct.
In other words. Okay.
It's really hard to model these things, just because there's a lot of uncertainties. But to the best of, but the studies are legit based on the data that we have today.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, awesome. Yeah, I feel like I just got a really, really good lesson on cultivated meat. Sometimes I don't have time to read articles on every single thing, so you just gotta talk to some people. Okay.
Yeah, just want to throw it out there that it's not just cultivated meat; it's alternative proteins. So alternative proteins categorized into plant-based foods, cultivated meat, and fermentation products. Fermentation products is when we're not talking about we're talking about precision fermentation, not just like making beer and wine.
Yeah.
So that's when you actually make dairy and egg that are identical in a molecular level with conventional dairy and egg, except that they're not animal source. So they come from like bacteria or yeast. So you can actually make cheese that has casein and the same like proteins that give cheese those characteristics, but you make these proteins in like other microorganisms. So that's a huge deal as well. So just know that these are areas that you can support either with your money or by dedicating your career. So if you are like into PR, a software engineer, it really doesn't matter. You can use, if you don't know how, just come to me, I'll tell you how you can apply your field of interest in alternative proteins.
Yeah.
But with ASAP, I guess another thing that I'm trying to do is to produce more people like myself. Because I think I'm a scientist. You can just replace me and with someone else with the same background to do the same thing, more or less. But with ASAP, we are trying to get just more scientists and politicians and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, precision fermentation is really interesting. I'm very excited for what that looks like 30 or 40 years from now, when you can like just make foods that are like insanely nutritious, like potentially more nutritious than any food we have now, and potentially tastier than any food we have now, just like in this like really modular way. So that's like, I think that's really, really cool. Although I'm sure most people are going to have an appeal to nature aversion to that. But I think it's pretty sweet.
It's stupid.
Okay, so and just to remind everyone, if you want to send questions, super chats, tips and stuff, we will be answering questions here in a minute. Before we get to that, though, I do want to ask you about Cosmic Skeptic. So for people who don't know, or maybe I mentioned this at the top, right? You were one of Cosmic Skeptic's biggest Patreon supporters, the biggest Patreon supporter. Is that correct?
One of them could be the biggest, but I don't know how much. I was the top tier, so I don't really know how much other people were paying.
Okay.
But yeah.
And so walk me through that. Like, what about Cosmic Skeptic were you like, yeah, he's the real deal? Like, I really want to support this guy. Like, how did you discover him?
When I was in graduate school, my doctorate advisor actually sent me one of his videos. I didn't know Alex, and he was that was the video that he had a meat eater case for veganism. And so he sent it to me as if like, you don't know how to talk about veganism. That's how you talk about veganism. Just like, watch this guy. He didn't say that, but it just,
oh, that's funny.
I felt like it was right.
So he wasn't a vegan, the person that sent it to you?
No.
Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, interesting.
It is hilarious and also mind-boggling that, anyways, like people who are very smart, they can afford it for sure. Yeah. They know everything, they still just don't take action. So anyways, but yeah, he sent me that video and then I was like, I'm not sure if this guy is vegan though. But a couple of months later, he released that video, like animal liberation, something I really liked about, or why it's time for animal liberation, I think.
I remember that one.
I think something that I really admired in that was, he said that I apologize if I make you uncomfortable, but I will ruin every party because this is really important. And I see someone on the chat, Michael Askew, I think, who says like he always wears his vegan hat. Yes, like it's uncomfortable to do that sometimes, but it's like this is something we need to talk about.
Yeah.
So I really like that approach, and I think it was very articulate and all that. And I was suffering from depression and more like burnout from my activism because it was not effective. And, I come across this guy and read YouTube comments, and from vegans to non-vegans, they were like, I'm going vegan. It's funny because I was just giving a talk at MIT, and some of the students over there actually said they went vegan because of like Alex.
Wow.
So yeah, it's like crazy the impact that video had. So at the time, I wasn't doing much, and I was like, I want to just help the movement. So here is a guy who's articulate, who has a big platform, and his platform is also not just vegan. So it's a fresh platform of hopefully rational thinkers who hopefully are open to the message. So that was my idea at first.
Yeah. Yeah, it does really suck that he went ex-vegan because I agree. All those things, like, I thought his videos were really, really eloquent, really persuasive. And like you said, I think the big thing is that he wasn't a vegan. He wasn't a vegan channel originally, so he had this big cross section of people he could bring into the community, So do you remember when you first heard that he was no longer vegan? Do you remember what you felt in that moment?
Yeah, the same guy, Ben, who adores you, he actually messaged me. He said, hey, yeah. Oh, so I actually talked to him about Alex because we both were fans. And I was like, I'm not sure. He hasn't made any videos. So I'm considering, and I have literally my own nonprofit. Like, I have to be really careful with how I donate my money. And I don't feel right. And we just decided that I stop, which is something I did just maybe a few weeks before the video came out. So the first thing he did was, like, Ben texted me. He said something about he's no longer vegan. And I was like, what the hell? How did that happen? So yeah, that was my reaction. But it would have burned more if I was actually currently, like, paying him at the time. So I felt a little better, at least.
Yeah, I didn't even believe it.
It was annoying. It's like, imagine just like you're an atheist and you're paying someone to advocate for atheism, and they're like low-key just advocating for religion, or vice versa. Doesn't matter. But imagine, like, I was like, oh my God, like, with my money, part of my money was actually spent on, like, animal products, and that was, like, really hurtful. And knowing that how so many people will just use this as an excuse to just not be vegan. So the damage that it was going to cause was the worst part, honestly.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes to the thing, like, where I was talking about earlier, when people say individuals don't make a difference. And it's like, maybe I could believe that if you were, like, a random person in small town USA, whatever. But, like, Alex cannot possibly make the case that he as an individual isn't going to make a difference. Like, that, it's absurd, And so, like, to see that as a sort of, like, part of his justification in one of those, in either the post or the video, I can't remember which one, was just, like, mind blowing to me. I was like, how can you say that about yourself? Like, that just strikes me as insane. So.
Actually, I want to say something about, like, individuals don't make a difference. Funny enough, a lot of people who say that who are vegan became vegan because one individual was doing activism, right? A lot of times, like, people hate PETA, but they actually worked at PETA sometime in the past, or they became vegan because of PETA. That's just one example, but I'm doing this today because someone came to me and talked to me, right? You probably became vegan because some activist, some individual, right? You didn't become vegan because the system was kind of 2% vegan. I don't know, whatever that means. So that's why it's so important. And then there is that snowball effect, right? So when you become vegan, you're more likely to speak up. You're more likely to dedicate your careers to veganism. How many nonprofits, how many, like GFI itself, right? The head of GFI, we don't talk about animal rights as much at GFI, but you know that the guy had that fire originally. It's always the case, right? So people who end up doing effective work at the end of the day are vegan and believe in the cause. Just think about it. Like, it actually gets worse because some people avoid going vegan because they're like, as long as I donate $5 to this campaign, that reduces 100 points of chicken suffering, so that justifies me eating chickens. And it's just like, that's not how it works.
People forget they're not an island. Like, you can for, like, analytical purposes say, me as an individual going vegan reduces, like, suffering or deaths or right violation by X amount, but you're not factoring in all these other causal ripple effects you as a person being vegan are going to have on your social networks. Even if you're not speaking up that much, just the fact of being vegan, that people are now, like, it's slightly more normalized. Or when you go, now your friends will have to go to a restaurant that has vegan options or make you vegan food or something. You know what I mean? Like, even that alone, just exposing them to vegan recipes or just things they didn't even know weren't vegan, like, I think it was, like, something with, like, someone was recommending like, oh, you should check out these wool socks or whatever. And I'm like, well, I don't wear wool. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'm vegan. And they're like, oh, I thought vegan was just like food. And I'm like, no, it's not. You know what I mean? And so that was just like, without even like being like specifically advocating, for veganism, that's just like a little piece of information now they have that's going to be bouncing around in their head, So I think that this thing of like individuals don't make a difference is just ridiculous. And then looking at it in this very myopic, narrow way of like just the animals I save or whatever,
Yeah,
So I
think that's a huge mistake. To your point, I asked Twitter what made you vegan once, and someone said, I went out with colleagues and one person just ate salads, and I asked why, and they just didn't have vegan option, and so that person got salads, and then this person noticed, asked why, talked about veganism. Not only she is vegan herself now, but also her entire family and children are vegan now, right? Just it all started because one person at some point refused to bend under pressure and buy animal products. So oftentimes I get the idea of like, it's easier to get 10 people to reduce than like, with the same amount of effort, you can get 10 people to reduce and probably 2 people go vegan. I get that math, but that's not where it stops. When you have vegans, then they're more likely they are going to reject animal products. And every time they do that, they're sending a message. They're not normalizing animal consumption. So all of that comes into play. Not to mention that the vegan one is more likely to stay vegan, is more likely, if it's ethical vegan, right? It's more likely to use their careers for something relevant, and just goes on and on. It expands indefinitely. Versus when you're reducitarian or flexitarian, whatever the hell that means, you go to a restaurant, and if they don't have vegan options, you're gonna just buy whatever, right? So I think that's a problem that I have. Like Peter Singer was saying, that if you go on a plane and the only food that they have is not vegan, then it's fine to eat that. Well, of course, it's not gonna bring an animal to life, whether you eat that. It's not about that. I understand the logic or lack thereof in terms of like math, but that's not why you should reject it. You should reject it because it sends a signal. It makes it, you are not part of a problem. You're not normalizing this, and you send a signal that this is wrong. And actually, funny enough, I know someone who became vegan because on a plane somebody refused to eat.
That's like, right? Man, you have an anecdote for everything for us.
No, seriously,
this is funny.
I don't even remember who this was, but I remember some students I was talking to. I was like, now I have an anecdote for it.
Yeah, that's hilarious, man. That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? There's just like the normalization of it is such a huge part. And I think too, like, if you're like, oh, well, they didn't have a vegan option on the plane, so I ate this non-vegan option. It's like, it really does undersell the seriousness of it, right? Like, you can bring food on planes. Like when I go to the airport, I bring snacks with me, right? Like even before I was vegan. Yeah. Right. Like who would have thought? But even before I was vegan, I brought snacks to the airport. So it's like, and also like, I don't even know what's like the longest flight you're going to be on before you land somewhere. Like, I don't know, maybe 8 hours if it's international, 10 hours. Like, I don't know. You can go 8 or 10 hours without eating if you have to. Like, it's not, unless you're maybe have a medical condition or whatever. But yeah, I just like, that stuff makes no sense to me. I don't get it.
Hashtag Alex.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Unless you're in France, where they don't actually have vegan food, apparently. Okay. So enough about that. I just did that. This is like really the last time I want to bring up Alex. I already did so much on him, but I thought since you were on and you were his Patreon supporter, I thought that would be fun for the audience. Okay, guys. So I'm going to take questions now. It looks like I think we only have one question. Let me see. But if you guys have questions, please go ahead and start putting them in now. Let's see what we got. So Lithium Dragon, thank you. He donated $5 through Super Chat. He said, any advice on how to do activism at a college? Can you table as an independent or have to be part of an organization?
Very good question. If it's a public university, you have all the rights to be there. In most places, especially typically there is like a free speech zone, or if it's a public property, you have all the rights to be there as long as you're not blocking the way and some rules like that. but they cannot kick you out. If they do, please contact either me, I'll hook you up with lawyers to sue them, or contact a place called FIRE, F-I-R-E. So that's a violation of your First Amendment rights. So if it's a private university, it's different. So they do have the right to tell you leave if they don't like the message, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do, and there is no way around it. So the way we do that is by basically making a big deal about it. They may not care about you, but they would care about their face. So if they think the last thing they want is a newspaper article saying that someone was just showing like go vegan and they had to kick them out. So that does not look good.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That is a good point.
With private universities, it's always like a little trickier, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Yeah, because what I have is a couple private universities around me, and I had read that like it's not necessarily like legal or in their policy to like film and do activism there. Well, maybe it's more the filming, I guess, because I always have, of course, have my camera with me. So, yeah, that's good. That's good to know.
So it's interesting. The question was brought up because there are actually animal rights organizations who want to go do something on campus, but they need permit to be there. And the permit has to come from a registered student organization. And almost all the time, there is no animal-friendly organization that would support them at all.
Yeah.
This was the case with a tour that recently was going in every university to talk about animal testing. It was like a VR set against animal testing. And they just had trouble. If it wasn't because of ASAP chapter being a registered student organization in several universities, they couldn't be on campus. So another benefit of what we do is that finally we're going to have an ASAP chapter in every university. So if others want to come and contribute, we can help them, because right now that system just doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, that's very good to know. Yeah, these are the sorts of like logistical things that are very helpful.
Yeah, Natalie is here. She says, oh, by the way, hi. She's amazing. Check her YouTube, definitely. She was here in Austin with us, and oh my God, she's so good. Anyways, but she says that she got kicked out of Harvard, and yeah, Harvard is a private university, and that's why it's difficult. But on the other hand, Harvard really cares about their face. So that's the second route.
Especially with like, even if they don't care about veganism per se, I'm sure they wouldn't want to like be seen kicking someone out who's promoting something that's environmentally friendly, at least, you know, because they're at least going to not want to look bad on that front, I imagine. Okay, who else? Any more questions, guys? Feel free to send them in. We do have another super chat. There is no question, but it's from Vegan Pundit. So thank you for the super chat. We really appreciate it. And like I said, everyone, I'm just going to be donating anything I get from the live stream, any sort of super chats or donations to ASAP. So if you want to ask a question or get money to ASAP, feel free. The other thing, if you guys just want to @ me in chat, @debugyourbrain, and I'll be able to like see the questions. Otherwise, just scrolling through, it's kind of hard to find questions. Yeah, if you have any more questions for Dr. Faraz or myself. Yeah.
Someone is asking Pandora's bread, I think. I'm not sure if we covered that. They're asking about technical-minded people, like the biggest tip to get technical-minded people to consider veganism, which requires an emotional response to. Okay, I'm not sure if I understand the question exactly, but what I gather from this question, I think some people who are technical-minded, or scientists or philosophers who are really good at like coming up with justifications or theories to justify not being vegan. I guess to that I say having the footage has been really helpful. So showing them the footage on the spot. I'll give you an example. I talked to people who said either they don't care about animals at all or like, I just don't care. And I said, I think you are resisting. I think the only people who don't care about animals being harmed are actual psychopaths, and I don't think you are a psychopath. I think you are just resisting. And the moment I said that, he opened up and started watching. I was like, there is no way you step on a dog's foot and you're like, it's whatever.
Yeah.
So then he started becoming honest. And I also come across a lot of people who say, I know why I should be vegan, but I don't know. And I'm just like selfish. And it's really easy when I tell them, I'm like, it's easy for us to say that we are selfish because we are not being harmed in this situation.
Yeah.
Generally, when you have the footage and you point at them and you say, put yourself in their place and evaluate your objections from their perspective, how do you think they feel, right? Then that really clicks a lot of times, even if you're trying to justify it by weird philosophy or like scientific things.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think that like, as someone who is very like technical and philosophy minded and all that, even the most technical philosophy minded person responds to putting themselves directly in the victim's perspective, especially when you give a really graphic yet accurate account of what the victim is going through, right? Very few people are resistant to that when you're like, you know, what would you say to the pig before we put them in the gas chamber? You know, what if you were in the pig's position? Like, what would you do? So I think even the most technical minded person is not really resistant to that. The only thing I like to do with like very technical minded people who are going deep in philosophy is I kind of shift the topic to psychology and go a little meta on the conversation. Kind of like what you were saying. It's like, you know, I like to say like, okay, let's think about this in another context. You know, maybe I bring up like, you know, perhaps I bring up slavery or something like that and be like, would this fly in that context? And when they're like, I don't know, that doesn't, you know, whatever, it's not the same, blah, blah, blah. I sometimes just like to ask them like, do you think that really is a bad analogy? Like, what do you think is more likely? That's a bad analogy, or your brain is trying to rationalize it away because you've been brought up your entire life to be eating meat and secretions and animal products. You know what I mean? And I find a lot of times that will break through to a person because they're like, yeah, okay, I guess I am probably rationalizing, you know? So rather than going really hard on the philosophy front, pulling back and kind of talking about their psychology instead. It is interesting. I think that one of my favorite quotes is, we're not rational creatures, we're rationalizing creatures. And there's a lot of research showing that smart people oftentimes don't make better decisions, but they're way, way better at justifying their bad decisions. And so like this is like, it's like the counterintuitive thing of like, well, they're so smart, why wouldn't they just come to the right conclusion? And that's why. But yeah, so I think we got a couple other questions. He said, I just got here. Did you talk about your former friendship with Cosmic Skeptic? Yeah, we did. We just talked about, I don't know if you were friends with him per se, but we did talk about, Faraz's relationship with Cosmic Skeptic there. Someone wants to know how they get in touch with you. So what are your socials? How can they hit you up on the socials, Faraz?
Twitter is very easy, Twitter and Instagram, but also email. So if you go to Allied Scholars, you can actually send a message through that or through contact from our website. But in other social media, especially Instagram and Twitter, I'll definitely respond.
And you're just Dr. Faraz Harsini on Instagram, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then same on Twitter?
Yes.
You're pretty easy to find if I remember. I just typed in your name and I found you pretty quickly on all the,
yes.
on all the socials. So I wasn't like, oh, well, he's got some weird, I don't know, version of the name or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so Pandora's Bread said that did answer his question. Awesome. Or their question, I'm not sure. Let's see if I see any other questions.
Something I would add in general that might be helpful is the sign of effectiveness of our strategy or outreach is not necessarily how the other person behaves or reacts. Because a lot of times they may actually get sad, and vegans are like a mirror. So all we do is we are a reflection of non-vegans' misalignment between actions and values. So a lot of times when they get mad, it's kind of misdirected at us. And generally a few months later, a few weeks later, they actually notice that it's just because of internal hypocrisy. And, I myself, like my friend was really kind. She wasn't really rude or anything, but I was still offended because no one really likes to be held accountable, right? So even when you do that in the nicest way, people may still get upset. So that's not a reflection of on your outreach. It's generally just the other person being uncomfortable. But sometimes to change, I mean, how can you change if you're not uncomfortable, right? Who wants to change if you're not uncomfortable? Mm-hmm. Now that thing that is uncomfortable sometimes is just like an internal conflicts that no one had brought it up to you before, so that like you always say you love animals, but you mm-hmm. eat them. No one has ever mentioned that there is conflict here until that vegan says, really, to not be a hypocrite, you just have to align your actions with your values. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes people get upset, sometimes maybe they get sad or whatever, but that doesn't mean that you are not being effective. Mm-hmm. So I don't say go be rude. Like Justin said, you can be assertive, you can be direct. You shouldn't compromise for animals, but just because people get upset, don't think that you are not being effective. A mm-hmm. lot of people that I know who are doing effective things at some point became mad at vegans.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just like, yeah, I just totally echo what you said, because people aren't going to have a strong emotional response if they don't think there's some kernel of truth typically, right? Like if I was out there with a sign and I was saying, I'm like a rocks rights activist, right? Don't kick rocks anymore because I think rocks are sentient, right? I'm not going to have people coming up getting super pissed at me and complaining to me about being a rocks rights activist because it's so ridiculous. The reason they're getting mad about veganism is because they know somewhere in their heart of hearts it's true, right? So yeah, getting mad is, again, it can be a sign that you're pushing too aggressively, but many times if you're just being direct and assertive, getting mad is just a byproduct that is going to happen some percentage of the time, even with good activism. So yeah, I totally agree there. All right. Do we have, someone is asking about taurine. They're saying, is taurine necessary? I don't know if they mean for cats or humans. For cats, I know that, you can just supplement taurine in the food. For humans, I'm a level 5 vegan. I don't remember if that's like a conditionally essential nutrient or what, actually.
Yeah, that is correct. It's not an essential nutrient. Mm-hmm. Our body makes it. And you can get it also synthetically. And fun fact for you, even non-vegan cat foods, they still don't have enough taurine, so they still add synthetic taurine to them.
Yeah. So so for people who are like afraid of supplements and supplements are going to kill you for some unstated reason. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's the answer to taurine.
But I guess something to always consider when you feel like you are lost, because there's like a lot of misinformation and a lot of anti-vegan things mm-hmm. going on. Just remember that there are tons of not vegan societies, but places like Mayo Clinic, mm-hmm. Kaiser.
I won't eat anything that casts a
other
shadow.
Dietetic associations like in the UK, mm-hmm. they all say that you can be vegan and you can be healthy, mm-hmm. right? So if it was such a big thing, like a well-known nutrient like taurine, and was missing, we should have seen something, right?
Yeah.
And always remember that there is a large population on Earth that never had meat to begin with, like populations in India, Hindus, Buddhists, Seventh-day Adventists. So we know that, when was the last time you went to a hospital and someone was dying just because of taurine deficiency, right? Mm-hmm. Don't let these misinformations to distract you from the truth, which is always ask yourself, what is number one cause of death? Is it like B12 deficiency? Is it like omega-3 deficiency? Or is it like cardiovascular diseases, cancer, right? So don't lose that sight.
Yeah. The other thing here for people too, is that you have to understand when you go you hyper focus on mechanisms and specific nutrients, you can sort of tell any story you want, right? And hyper focusing on mechanisms and things like that, like mechanistic studies, tend to be very low on the hierarchy of evidence. What you really care about is outcome data, right? And so like, what is the broad scale outcome of eating a vegan diet, right? And the outcomes are good. So like, even if there was something, let's say that taurine has a health benefit. if taurine has a health benefit, but vegan diets are still producing good health responses, it means that somewhere along the way in that giant complicated mess that is life and biology, it doesn't seem to matter. It's either countervailed by something in the vegan diet, it doesn't matter in the context of the vegan diet, something, right? And so like always, for health things, always look at outcome data if you can, if it's available, right? Mechanistic studies tend to point us, they're good for pointing us in the direction of different kinds of research and looking at epidemiology, outcome studies, things like that. But mechanisms themselves can, are really more of a starting point, a jumping off point for science rather than like a final destination.
You're actually absolutely right. So even when some nutrients are lower in vegans, they don't necessarily lead to clinical outcomes. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing to consider is that the normal range is generally defined on population who have something in not necessarily healthy amounts. Mm-hmm. For instance, when it comes to iron, it's a lot of times based on people who heavily eat meat, right? So mm-hmm. the range for white blood cells, for other inflammatory markers, it's all based on like what an average person eats, right? Mm-hmm. So just notice that there is that factor. And the fact that something is lower doesn't necessarily mean that there is like a clinical outcome difference. There's that. And also don't really just get confused with this bioavailability things, because a lot of times they're based on animal models, like I don't know, you look into it. So from something that you read online with like reality, it's like a completely different thing. It's like what you read in a news article is like bioavailability of protein was like lower or whatever. And you look at the study, they feed like pigs like dry beans, and then they look at like how much protein they absorb and secrete. It's just like not realistic. It's either that or ignoring a lot of scientific facts. For instance, one article actually came my way to kind of respond to, so I dug through it, and it was basically, phytates. Plants have so much phytates, it absorbs, it binds to iron, makes iron less bioavailable. Here it is compared to an actual meat burger and see how much more iron in theory would be available. Then look at the data. They're comparing raw plant-based meat with raw meat, right? Yeah. So the reason that this is important is because phytates that bind to iron, they actually in non-heme iron in plants. When you cook beans, when you cook just legumes, or when you process food, phytate actually goes away, and iron, non-heme iron, actually becomes more bioavailable. On the other hand, you always see there's always this like a picture of a burger with like this is how much iron there is. Yeah. When you cook heme iron, when you cook meat, heme iron actually precipitates over 50%, like 63 or 65% of it just precipitates. It's just like people just don't even think about it, right? Yeah. And then they say availability of like iron is like lower in like plants. And then you look at the data, only 20% of iron actually in meat eaters comes from meat. The rest of it already comes from cereals and vegetables. So it's just like, there is so much to it. Yeah. It's really easy to be lost and confused. So I totally get that.
Yeah. I'll tell you an anecdote here. My girlfriend, chronically low on iron, likes to give blood, low on iron so much that, she was like taking iron supplements, and she would try to eat a lot of red meat. This is back before we were vegans. And, the first time she ever had like iron in like the healthy, like above healthy range when she went to donate blood was, I think 2 years after she'd gone vegan. So like, from eating, specifically eating like things like red meat to try to get that iron, to totally vegan diet. And now her iron is actually in the correct range, So there's just funny stuff like that. Also, like, I think another thing too is like, not everyone can read scientific research, myself included. I'm not particularly good at reading scientific research. But like, you have to like ask yourself something. What is more likely, like with something like taurine or whatever, phytates, whatever you want, right? Is it more likely that all these giant like health organizations around the world just whoopsie daisy missed taurine. It somehow slipped through the data. Like all these like people who have devoted their lives to nutrition in different parts of the world with different incentive structures, that they all got it wrong. And this random carnivore influencer got it right. You know what I mean? So like, again, always, if you can read the science, read the science. You know, I always encourage people to do that. But if you don't have those skills, there are heuristics that where you can just sort of do a sanity check, I call it, on like what is more likely here, you know, in these two scenarios.
So that's what I was trying to say. Again, you said that better.
I think we just have different ways of saying things. I try to practice saying things very succinctly, though. So we got Anonymous Vigoon donated $10. No question. Thank you so much, Anonymous Vigoon. That's great. Oreo is cool. Donated $2 twice. So he's got two questions, or she. Thoughts on lab-grown animal products? We sort of answered that, but they might not have been here. Do you want to give them a brief rundown on lab-grown animal products real quick? Just a quick. We'll do like an elevator pitch. Quick elevator.
Yeah. So I acknowledge that it might not be the perfect solution, but it's one of the best that we have. And once it's up and running, there is no connection to the animal that it originates from. So it's, in theory, it will not hurt animals at all. And yeah, again, it's not perfect, but it's one of the best things that we have.
Cool. And then they had another question. Your opinion on no-kill shelters? Do you have a strong opinion?
Kill them all.
Huh?
I'm joking. I don't know. So, no-kill shelter. So, like, how would I be against? Am I missing some? I might be missing something that I don't know about this issue.
I don't know much about it either.
As opposed to what, like killing animals in the shelter?
I guess so. Yeah, I'm not sure.
In general, I would say that I'm against. So once we are done with pets, once we rescue all the pets from shelters, I feel like we shouldn't continue the business of having animals for our own petty pleasure. Animals are not here for us to not be lonely. But until that point, I think there is like a ton of animals from shelters that we have to save.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. All right, let's wrap this up here, guys. Any last questions? Throw them in there. I think we've taken enough of Faraz's time today. We do have one from CD Activism. He says, what's the best response to people who say that there's no vegan bodybuilders who've been vegan since birth, therefore we need to eat flesh at some point in our life to build muscle? Do you want to take that first?
No bodybuilder. So
I think the thing is, what you'll hear that people say is like, no one has been, there's no bodybuilders who are vegan since birth. So like the claim is they built all their muscle while they were not vegan. And then they just went vegan later and just like were able to like keep their muscle.
Okay. So there is a few things that are wrong with that mentality. First of all, it's like, you don't know they don't exist. It's like the famous ones that you know have been vegan. But like, how many years has veganism been like mainstream media, right? How old is veganism in terms of being something that people discuss? I mean, a lot of people existed in like, you know, they never ate meat or anything. But like, as a movement where people just like become aware of like animal cruelty and environment and go vegan, that's not that long, right? So, and so there's one problem, and then the sample size is also very small. So it's like, you know, how many famous bodybuilders there are that, you know, what percentage of them should be vegan, right? So there's that. And again, going back to what you were saying, we have to have something. So what makes a bodybuilder, I don't know, strong? What would that be? Would that be the protein? Would that be the metabolism? What nutrients would that person be missing that they can't get, and it has to come from animals? So there's that. Again, like scientifically, actually things that we can actually look at is that what data says is that you can reduce inflammation after exercising if you're on a whole food plant-based diet. We know that you can get enough proteins. Like, is there just some, again, nutrient that everybody just missed? And also, we have vegans who've been bodybuilders for a long time. So it's not like, yes, some things take time to develop, but not like 7 or 10 years. I mean, that's pretty much enough time for many organs and many tissues to regenerate by that time, except like very few tissues. So there's that. And at the end of the day, don't be a bodybuilder. Like, even if that was true, just don't be a bodybuilder. Like, do you think like being a bodybuilder for you, I don't know, just like is worth more than an animal's life? Just for what? It's like, the question is, can you be vegan and healthy? And the answer is yes, done to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what would be part of my response too. Is like, even if that were true, even if you couldn't get bodybuilder big on a vegan diet, does that make it right to put pigs in gas chambers for this? You know, the other thing too is that there is actually animal protein available on the market right now that is vegan. So there's Precision Fermentation Whey, California Whey, and then Whey Forward are both. They're not plant-based, but they are vegan. So kind of a weird, counterintuitive thing. So if the person says that, you can say, and even if you are concerned about that, boom, there's your protein. But yeah, and like you said too, there's like, I myself, here's an anecdote. I myself, went vegan 3 years ago, and I've built muscle since then. You know what I mean? Like, I've gotten bigger since I was 3 years ago, and I've been eating nothing but plant-based. So like, plenty of those bodybuilders have gained muscle post going vegan, even if they had muscle beforehand. So like, it's like a patently absurd claim to me, just like ridiculous. He says, then they'll just say it's too early to know the health outcomes of long-term plant-based dieting. Yeah. What do you say to that? Let's make this the last question. Unless anyone donates more money, then I'll answer, but this will be the last question for Dr. Faraz. So what do you say to that? We don't actually have the long-term health data for these things.
So again, you can look at societies and communities that ate pretty much primarily plant-based. So even if they had any animal products, that would have been like a couple of percentage. So there are societies who've been eating mainly plant-based, and that like a little fish or wine that they had, that doesn't mean that they survive or they, it didn't cause harm because they had wine. We know wine does not mean healthy. So, but we have cases where people ate primarily plant-based. Then you have cases like in India that there is a, huge population of like vegetarians that live their lives without ever having meat. Then you have Jains. Some Jains actually also don't consume dairy. Then you have like Seventh Adventist people, right? So these populations exist. But again, I would say, it's funny because like, what would be the nutrient that is just like missing? Because we know what you need, what the essential amino acids, essential nutrients are. But what's so misdirected in this question is that, what are the top causes of death in the US, right? So what we have shown is that you can prevent, to a very good degree, a lot of top causes of death, right? So we know that 80% of cardiovascular diseases, at least, type 2 diabetes almost entirely, cancers, 40% of cancers. So a lot of these things can be prevented, and these are top causes of death. Again, it's a bad way of even asking the question, I think.
Yeah, something I'll add to that too is whenever you have this, particularly about veganism, right? So someone says, hey, we don't have the long-term health data, so we don't know 80 years from now what the health data is going to be. Implicit in that question is that it is going to be negative. So even if we don't have that data, and you're saying there's uncertainty, that uncertainty goes both ways. So where you think, well, maybe we'll live 10 years, less, but we could also live 10 years more. And so that uncertainty kind of averages out. So if you do think it's uncertain, then the average of that uncertainty is still sort of, I guess, move forward is a sort of neutral position, unless you have good reason to really think one way or the other. There's some sort of priors that you have that are going to direct you to saying, well, it's probably going to be less healthy, or it's probably not going to be more healthy. So just like the thing is like what we have right now, the sad American diet or whatever it is that people eat, that's not necessarily the neutral position, right? There are no neutral positions. This is one type of diet. Vegan diet is another type of diet. So just, I don't know if I explained that super well. It's something I'm going to do a video about at some point, but just kind of keep that in mind, that uncertainty can go both ways, basically.
I won't eat anything that casts
actually makes me think of an analogy. Like, imagine the norm of society was everyone was like smoking cigarette, and you showed that smoking cigarette causes cancer, and then someone said, but we don't know the long-term impact of not smoking,
yes,
right?
I love that. Yeah.
Yes, maybe. But what we have shown is that it also doesn't really make sense to me that if meat was the right food for us to consume, how come that the cholesterol, the saturated fat, the endotoxins, the heme iron, the carcinogenic compounds, all of that, how come it's carcinogenic? How come it increases the risk of diabetes and cancer and all of that? If that was the true food for us, right?
Yeah.
And these are things that we have shown. It's not meat itself. It's like we know what compounds in meat cause cancer. We know what compounds increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. At least we have some ideas. Not all of them, but we know some of them, right? So you can literally say that by removing this from your diet, you can have a healthier life, and that comes already with plant-based diet.
Yeah. I agree. I like the analogy of like, if we were smoking and we took it away, who knows what would happen? We don't know the long-term benefits of like taking cigarettes out. That is funny. But yeah, it's kind of to the point I'm saying. CDA activism says, then they just say we should keep animal slavery just in case. That's the thing, CDA activism, is that the just in case doesn't matter, that the risk calculus doesn't make sense. If we're truly uncertain, then the benefit is as far to the right as the detriment is to the left. And so we have an average expected value that would be like 0, essentially, if we're truly in a neutral position. I'm not...
100% agree.
What?
I 100% agree. I think like, what evidence do you have that long-term this is necessary, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. We did get one more paid question from Mia Prisborowski. She said, thank you, Mia, by the way. What makes you the most hopeful? I really like this question. What makes you the most hopeful, Faraz?
To me, seeing the result of my work is something that really makes me hopeful. I was frustrated for a long time knowing that what I was doing was basically very isolated, like going on the streets and talking to people about veganism, and then they go about their lives and we never meet each other or whatever. But now there is like an ecosystem where it grows, and every time that we contribute to it, we actually harvest so much. And the harvesting comes in the form of seeing students becoming vegan and writing to me, or telling me that now they're going to actually use their careers in this way. Or recently, a 15-year-old reached out to me. He came across my Instagram, saw one of the events that we had with allied scholars about dairy and racism, and he just joined the talk. It was virtual. After that, he wrote back to me and he said, hey, now I want to do something, and I've been vegan. I want to go change the dining hall in my high school. He's 15.
Wow.
And I took a screenshot of that. I taught that in Harvard. I was teaching a class in Harvard, and I was like showing students. I was like, if a 15-year-old can understand that there is a problem and he has that much courage to go fix it, do you think you can do that?
Yeah.
I was like,
I love that. I love that. Yeah.
Things like that really make me excited to see that the next generation, I think there is a lot of talent. I think there is a lot of potential. We just have to harvest that and put it in action and organize it. And when I see that I'm able to do that, it really, that's what keeps me up.
Yeah. That's amazing, man. You need to make like a book of all your like little like inspirational anecdotes. I can't believe how many like reference experiences you have for like each little thing. Like you're like, nope, actually, I actually had that exact situation and someone was convinced for like literally every situation there is. That's funny. Okay, well, I think that was the last question, and I appreciate that you have actually stayed for 2 hours, which was much longer, I think, than we'd initially planned. So I really appreciate that a lot. And yeah, do you just want to say, are there any closing words you want to say? Shout outs to your social media, anything else with Allied Scholars before you go?
Before that, I just want to say thank you for watching. Most importantly, please speak up. We can only get things done when we are out of our comfort zone. I want to say that I'm probably the most introvert person. The last thing I want to be is to be in front of cameras or do public speaking or just be out there talking to strangers about veganism. But the only reason I do that is because somebody has to. Animal rights is really a moral urgency, and it takes each of us to speak up. It's really not enough to be just vegan, right? We need active vegans, we need to speak up. And when I say that, it's like going from like your friends, your colleagues, to the stranger, any opportunity that you have that you can make it about veganism and say something, please do. And outside of that, if you can donate your time, money, skills, just do something. All I say is that in the face of injustice, silence is not an option. So as long as you're not silent, as long as you're doing something, I admire you.
Awesome.
And yeah, thank you so much for having me and talking about Allied Scholars. I was surprised that you were actually interested in this so much that you came to me and was like, I want to make make something about ASAP. And I really appreciate that because I really think I'm addressing one of the biggest missed opportunities in animal advocacy. Mm-hmm. And I know it's effective. I just have to scale up. And thank you for helping me to do that. And everyone else who donated or spend time here with us.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Yeah, it's been really fun. I definitely want to have you on again. I think maybe to dive deeper into some topics. So yeah, so we'll have to do this again sometime for sure. So I just say thank you for coming on. Thank you for everyone who watched and donated and went to Allied Scholars. Remember, just one more time, that link is at the top of the chat and in the description box. So I'm going to go ahead and let you go then, Dr. Faraz. Thank you so much. Everyone else in the chat, I will stay around for maybe 5 or 10 minutes and answer any additional questions you guys might have. So yeah, thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one.